My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old and I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I'm not the kind of man who likes to talk about himself. I never have been. I was raised by a father who believed that your work speaks louder than your words. He was a carpenter. He built things with his hands every single day of his life, and he always told me the same thing before I left for school. Daniel, whatever you build it right. Because one day, the only thing that will be left of you is what you created. I never forgot that. I grew up sketching buildings on the back of notebook paper. While other kids were drawing superheroes, I was drawing floor plans. I didn't know what an architect was at 12 years old. I just knew I loved the idea of something existing that didn't exist before, something real, something permanent, something that people would walk through every single day without knowing someone sat up until 3 in the morning making sure every measurement was perfect. That passion carried me through college. It carried me through years of low-paying internships, late nights, and more rejection letters than I could count. And eventually, it carried me to Harlow and Vance Design Group. Harlow and Vance. If you're in the commercial real estate development world, you know that name. They were one of the most respected mid-size architectural firms in the Midwest. 12 years old as a company, 41 employees, 3 major city contracts on their record, and for 6 years, they were my home. I gave them everything I had, every idea, every late night, every weekend, every creative bone in my body, and I believed, truly, completely believed, that they valued me. I was wrong. I joined Harlow and Vance as a junior designer at 28 years old. I remember my first day clearly. I walked into that office, clean lines, open floor plan, big windows overlooking downtown, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is where my career begins. And it did. Within my first year, I had already redesigned the workflow system for 3 ongoing projects. My manager at the time, a quiet man named Gerald, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Daniel, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't say this often, but you see things differently. Don't let anyone change that." Those words meant everything to me at the time. By year 2, I was leading my own small project team. By year 3, I had been promoted to senior design lead. And by year 4, I was the one they called when a client had a problem no one else could solve. But the project that changed everything, the one that became the center of my entire story, was the Caldwell Industrial Complex. Caldwell was a massive commercial development, a mixed-use complex in the heart of Columbus, retail on the ground floor, corporate offices above, a rooftop event space, underground parking, and a central atrium that I designed from a single sketch on a Tuesday morning that I drew while drinking bad coffee at my kitchen table. The atrium became the soul of that building. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels, natural light flowing through every level, a central spiral staircase that looked like it belonged in a museum. I poured 8 months of my life into that atrium alone. When we presented the initial concept to the Caldwell Group board, their lead developer, a sharp woman named Patricia Caldwell herself, stood up after the presentation and said 4 words I will never forget. "Who designed the atrium?" My director, Robert Vance, son of the company's founder, pointed at me across the conference table. She looked at me and nodded slowly. "Don't change a thing." That was the beginning of the best 18 months of my professional life, and the beginning of the end. About 14 months into the Caldwell project, things started to change. Nothing dramatic at first, just small things. The kind of things you notice but tell yourself you're imagining. I started being left off meeting invitations that I would normally be included in. Design review sessions that I had previously led were suddenly being held without me, and when I asked why, I was told it was just a scheduling thing. My access to the Caldwell project's shared server was quietly reduced. When I tried to open certain folders, I got an access denied message. I brought it up to our IT coordinator, and he just shrugged and told me to submit a ticket. I submitted the ticket. Nobody responded. Then came the day that I walked past Robert Vance's office and heard my name through the half-open door. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I just heard it and stopped. The voice speaking was Robert's. The other voice, lower, quieter, I recognized as Marcus Cole. Marcus was our head of client relations, a smooth talker, good with people, not a designer, never a designer, but very good at presenting other people's work as if he understood it. I stood there just long enough to hear Robert say, "Going forward, Marcus handles all direct communication with the Caldwell team. Daniel stays on technical execution. The client doesn't need to know who's doing what. They just need to see results." I walked away before I could hear anything else. But something cold settled in my chest, and it didn't leave. The next few weeks confirmed what I was beginning to understand. Marcus started appearing in photos with the Caldwell team at site visits. I had been told those meetings were client preference, Intimate team only. But there was Marcus, smiling in every picture, standing in front of my atrium design like he built it himself. I went back and looked at the project documentation, specifically the client-facing materials, the design proposals, the presentation decks. My name was disappearing. Slowly, quietly, systematically, my name was being removed from documents I had authored. The atrium design that bore my initials in the original file, updated version, no initials. The concept notes I had written in the early stages of development, attributed to the Harlow and Vance design team, not Daniel Marsh, not the man who sat at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning sketching that atrium on the back of an envelope. Just the team. I confronted Robert. I walked into his office, no appointment, no warning, and I put printed copies of both document versions on his desk, the original with my name, the updated version without it. He looked at them, then he looked at me, and he said, calmly, almost bored, "Daniel, this is standard practice when we submit to clients. It's a firm deliverable, not an individual showcase. You know that." "Robert," I said, "my name isn't just missing, it's been removed. Those are two different things." He straightened the papers on his desk and said, "I think you're reading too much into administrative formatting." Then he smiled and said, "You're one of our best people, Daniel. Don't create problems where there aren't any." I left his office, but I didn't let it go. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning that started like every other Thursday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:45. There was a young woman from HR sitting at the small conference room near the entrance. She had a folder in front of her and a look on her face that I recognized immediately. That look that people wear when they have to do something they've rehearsed. She asked me to sit down. She introduced herself as Claire, though I already knew her. Then she told me that Harlow and Vance was restructuring the senior design division, and that my position was being eliminated as part of the reorganization. She slid a termination letter across the table. I looked at it, I looked at her, and I said very quietly, "Is Robert available?" She told me that Robert was in a client meeting and was unavailable. A client meeting. On the morning they fired me, Robert was unavailable. I signed the acknowledgement. I was given 30 minutes to collect my personal items. A security guard, a man I had said good morning to for 6 years, stood near my desk while I packed a box. I didn't say anything to anyone, I just packed. Slowly, carefully. I picked up the framed photo of my father from my desk. I picked up the small wooden model of the atrium I had built by hand during the early design phase. I picked those two things up and I walked out. And as I passed through those glass doors I had personally specified in the building renovation, the doors that bore the exact handle design I had sourced from a supplier in Germany, I paused. I turned around, looked back at the lobby, and I thought about something my father told me when I was 17 years old. "Son, never let them see you break. Save that for somewhere private. In front of them, you stand tall." I stood tall, and I walked to my car. I spent the first 3 days at home, not grieving, thinking. I pulled out every document, every email, every file I had legally retained copies of from my time on the Caldwell project. I had been careful over the years, not because I suspected something, but because my father's voice was always in the back of my head. Build it right. Keep records. Know what you own. And as I went through everything, I found something that made me sit very still at my kitchen table for a long time. In the early stages of the Caldwell project, before the firm had fully committed to the design direction, I had created the atrium concept independently, on my own time, before it was an official firm project. The initial sketches, the concept notes, the structural logic, all of it was created in a 4-day period when I was on approved leave. I had timestamps. I had original files stored on my personal drive from those 4 days. I had an email I had sent to myself, a habit I developed years ago, with the concept attached, dated, and timestamped from before the project officially began. I had been documenting my own creative process for years without realizing I was building a case. I called a lawyer friend of mine, a man named Patrick who specialized in intellectual property. I explained everything. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Daniel, do you understand what you potentially have here?" I told him I was beginning to. He told me to bring everything in, every file, every email, every timestamp. And then he said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. "They may have fired you to avoid a design credit dispute, but if what you're telling me is accurate, they may have just handed you the keys to something much larger." Patrick and I spent the next 2 weeks going through everything. The intellectual property case was strong, not guaranteed, but strong. The timestamps told a clear story. The independent creation timeline was documented. If the atrium design was created before the firm's official project start date, on my own time, using my own resources, the question of who owned that design became complicated for Harlow and Vance very quickly. But that wasn't the largest discovery. The largest discovery came from a completely different direction. While reviewing my personal records, I came across something I had almost forgotten about. Something from nearly 4 years earlier, when the Caldwell project was first being considered and the firm was in early-stage negotiations with the development group. At that time, the firm's senior partners had been trying to secure development rights for a small parcel of land adjacent to the main Caldwell site, a parcel that would be used for contractor staging, material storage, and temporary site infrastructure during construction. Robert Vance had asked me personally, not through any formal process, just a direct ask, to handle the lease arrangement for that parcel. He had said the firm's legal team was overloaded, it was a simple short-term lease, and he trusted me to make it happen quietly. I had made it happen. I located the landowner. I negotiated the terms. I arranged the paperwork. And because the timeline was rushed and the firm's entity documentation wasn't ready in time for the initial signing, Robert had told me, in writing, in an email I still had, to sign as the interim leaseholder until we transfer it to the firm's name properly. The transfer was supposed to happen within 60 days. It never did. Patrick found the original lease when we were reviewing documents. He found the amendment extensions, 3 of them, that had been signed over the years to keep the arrangement in place as construction continued beyond the original timeline, and every single one of them still carried my name, Daniel Marsh. Not Harlow and Vance Design Group, not Robert Vance, not Marcus Cole, Daniel Marsh, the staging parcel that the entire Caldwell construction operation had been running through for years. The parcel that the contractors, the materials, the equipment access, and the site logistics all depended on, was leased in my name, and I had just been fired. Patrick looked at me across his desk. "Daniel," he said slowly, "do you understand what this means?" This time, I was the one who went quiet. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive person. I did not sit at home dreaming about revenge. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want to destroy anything. What I wanted was simple. What I wanted was what anyone in my position would want. Recognition, fairness, what was mine. Patrick and I spent 3 weeks preparing, quietly, carefully, the way my father would have done it. We documented the intellectual property case in full. We retained a specialist who reviewed my original atrium design files against the final Caldwell submissions and confirmed, in writing, that the core structural and aesthetic concept was consistent with my pre-project independent work. We reviewed every lease document, every amendment, every extension. All 3 were valid. All 3 bore my signature as leaseholder. None had ever been formally transferred to the firm's name, a fact that Patrick confirmed with the county records office. We prepared a formal legal notice regarding the design credit dispute. We prepared a separate formal notice regarding the lease arrangements, and then we waited for the right moment. That moment came on a Tuesday morning, approximately 5 weeks after my termination, when I received a congratulatory press release in my email from Harlow and Vance's public communications list that had never removed me, announcing the successful completion of Phase 2 of the Caldwell Industrial Complex. The announcement included photographs of the atrium, my atrium, with a quote from Marcus Cole describing his vision for the central atrium space. His vision. I forwarded the press release to Patrick. His response was 3 words. "It's time, Daniel." The legal notices were served on a Wednesday, not quietly, through proper channels, through Robert Vance's registered agent, through the firm's legal representative, and, because Patrick advised transparency, through a courtesy copy to Patricia Caldwell's office directly. I was told later, by someone who still worked at the firm who reached out to me privately, that the morning those notices arrived, Robert Vance read them at his desk and then walked straight to the bathroom and didn't come out for 20 minutes. Marcus Cole, I was told, went completely pale. Their legal team contacted Patrick the same afternoon. The conversation, as Patrick described it to me later, was not a calm one. The firm's lawyers initially insisted the design credit claim was without merit and that my independent work timeline was circumstantial. Patrick let them finish. Then he walked them through the timestamps, the email chain, the specialist's written comparison, the pre-project file metadata. The line went very quiet. Then their lead attorney asked about the lease. Patrick explained the situation, clearly, factually. He explained that Daniel Marsh was, at that moment, the legal leaseholder of the staging parcel. He explained that without that parcel, Phase 3 of the Caldwell development, which was already in early planning, could not proceed as currently structured. He explained that my continued cooperation with the lease arrangement was, at this point, An open question. There was a very long silence on the other end of that call. Then the attorney said, "We'll need to discuss this internally and respond." Patrick said, "Of course. You have 5 business days." Robert Vance called me personally on day 4. I let the phone ring twice before I answered. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He said, "Daniel, I think there's been a significant miscommunication on our end. I want to resolve this properly." A miscommunication. 6 years of work. My name erased from documents. Fired with 30 minutes to pack my desk. A miscommunication. I said, "Robert, I think you should talk to my attorney." He said, "I'd like to talk to you directly first, man to man." I thought about my father for a moment. I thought about those glass doors. I thought about the atrium. And then I said, "I am talking to you directly, Robert. I'm telling you directly. Speak to my attorney. Goodbye." I ended the call. The settlement negotiations took 11 days. I won't share every detail because some of it remains confidential. What I can tell you is this. My name was formally restored as the originating designer of the Caldwell Atrium. That restoration was made in writing, filed with the relevant professional records, and communicated to Patricia Caldwell directly. The lease arrangement was resolved with a financial settlement that compensated me fairly for the years of contribution that had been quietly written out of the firm's history. And a formal letter, signed by Robert Vance, acknowledged the administrative error in the project documentation and confirmed my contributions to the Caldwell project. I framed that letter, not out of arrogance, but because my father always said, "Whatever you build, build it right." And I wanted something on my wall that proved that I had. A few months after the settlement, I was walking through the completed Caldwell complex. I had been invited, officially, by Patricia Caldwell herself to a private walkthrough before the public opening. She had reached out personally after learning the full story. She shook my hand and said something I wasn't expecting. I always wondered why the atrium felt so personal. Now I know. I stood in the center of that space, under those glass panels I had sketched at my kitchen table. Next to that spiral staircase I had fought for in 3 separate design reviews. Inside a building I had given some of the best years of my life to, and I felt something settle inside of me that had been unsettled for a very long time. I thought about the people who had decided my name wasn't worth keeping. I didn't feel anger. I felt, strangely, grateful. Because if they hadn't fired me, I would never have gone through those files. I would never have found the lease. I would never have sat across from Patrick and heard him say, "Do you understand what you have here?" I would never have been forced to stand up for what was mine. The people who try to erase you sometimes don't realize they are handing you the only moment in your life when you will truly understand your own value. I understand mine now. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. And everything I have ever built, I built right. If you've ever felt like someone was quietly trying to write you out of your own story, keep your records, keep your files, keep your receipts, and keep building. Because the most dangerous thing you can be to someone who underestimates you is prepared.